As we think of some of the best shooting guard prospects in our lifetime, now still at 22, he's still young enough to be on our top 10 prospects list. Where would you rank Anthony Edwards as of this time relative to some of those other obviously great Hall of Fame players? Anthony Edwards, as one of the best shooting guard prospects that we've seen, has been compared to Michael Jordan, and he, of course, sloughed off those comments earlier. But then Kevin Garnett, of course, Wolves legend, quite topical around the All-Star break, compared Garnett to an early Michael Jordan, 1984 Michael Jordan, about the age that Anthony Edwards is right now in his age 22 season. Let me ask you this, Danny, just as you think about it, as we think of some of the best shooting guard prospects in our lifetime, now still at 22, he's still young enough to be on our top 10 prospects list. Where would you rank Anthony Edwards as of this time relative to some of those other obviously great Hall of Fame players?
It's a little bit hard for me because a lot of them were before my time. Like there is a weird lull in shooting guard prospects in the kind of my wheelhouse for this. I don't think of them as having super similar games, and T Mac is probably more of a three, right?
I would think so. Yeah, he's really. I mean, when I think of a shooting guard prospect, I think of either, T Mac, really, especially when he was young, he was like protecting the rim, doing a lot of stuff athletically. Like Vince Carter, I wouldn't necessarily think of as a shooting guard as much either. He was kind of more of a three to me.
And a lot of those guys are idiosyncratic. Like James Harden was, one of my favorite young players, but I think Harden and Edwards do it so differently because like there aren't that many physically, and it's part of the MJ comparison that makes sense is there aren't that many physically dominant and productive twos. Like usually they're a little bit bigger or they're a little bit smaller or something else like that. And Edwards can play the three, but he's, listed at 6'4", 225, I believe at this point. So he is,
and like a 7-foot wingspan too.
right. So, but he is more of a, like, you think of his roles, he can defend point of attack too, but like more of a two than a three. So I don't have a great one. I'm sure there are probably people like, I mean, Kobe was before, as I said, young Kobe were when I was like just watching games sometimes for fun as a kid. So I don't have a great comp.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of, in terms of like the playing style, maybe not. Like actually, I would say his playing style reminds me a little bit of Vince Carter. Now,
Sure.
Vince, even in a tougher era to get to the basket, was able to get there more and finish more. But Vince did have just that easy ability to get separation on the perimeter, fire up jumpers. And now Vince was someone who probably had his best years, really in his early 20s. And then I thought it was a little disappointing the way that he leveled off later in his career. I mean, there was a time when people thought that he was just way better than Tracy McGrady. Tracy McGrady ends up leaving Toronto, and Tracy McGrady, I think, ended up being a better player than Vince Carter until injuries really kind of sapped things for him. But I mean, the guys that come to mind for me when you look at the best shooting guards, I didn't go back to MJ because some of the stats on him just aren't as comparable. So Kobe Bryant obviously comes to mind. Dwyane Wade, I mean, those are the two best shooting guards to me after MJ of my lifetime. Reggie Miller, just a different type of game, not really comparable. James Harden, probably the most comparable just in terms of the physical composition, although Edwards with his 2-foot explosion is a different level as an athlete than Harden, but they both kind of have that big body, the big wingspan. But those are the three guys. So I think it's useful to go back. This is the age 22 season for Anthony Edwards. I want to compare him to Kobe Bryant, Dwyane Wade, and take a look at kind of where he is statistically compared to those guys. And I'm going to talk a little bit about just the comparison as well between their games and just what it looks like on paper. So I want to note a few things here. Obviously, the league average is much lower, right? If we're looking at a 22-year-old Kobe Bryant, that's the 01 season. A 22-year-old Dwyane Wade, that's actually his rookie season in 03-04. And then his breakout year, the next year, that's the first year we actually have play type data for Synergy, which I wanted to talk about a little bit. So the league average true shooting percentage in both these years is basically 52%, a little under 52%. Now, of course, it's 58%. And that's right where Anthony Edwards is this season, a little bit above 58%, now 59% true shooting. Anthony Edwards actually has the highest usage percentage, even higher than Kobe, now who was playing with Shaq during one of those. Shaq missed a bunch of time that year. That's part of what pushed up Kobe's usage.
Well, and that was the year that Kobe had a higher assist rate that year, if memory serves, because of
yes, yeah, and then, but it is interesting that Anthony Edwards, as much as there has been discussion of his passing, he actually, other than Dwyane Wade, has the highest assist percentage. That's basically an estimate of the percentage of teammate field goals a player assists while they're on the floor. Now, sometimes you can increase that just by shooting a lot yourself, by making sure that
the Monte Ellis corollary.
Yeah, but if you want to go look at assists per 100 possessions, Anthony Edwards actually has the highest assists, 7.3 per 100 possessions. You really have to. The pace was so much slower then. Obviously, offense was down, so you just have generally fewer assists. But that, as much as Anthony Edwards gets looked at as like, oh, he's not that natural of a passer, and obviously this Wolves team has less spacing than a lot of these other teams today, although they probably have more spacing than teams that like Kobe and Dwyane Wade were playing on. So that was interesting to me to see that, because if you look at Kobe and James Harden is still in a 6-man role in 2012 at this point. Dwyane Wade, this is again his rookie season, and when he only had a 25 usage, that's the year before Shaq gets to Miami, and they make it to the second round, but lose to the Pacers that year.
And Nate, one of the wild things when you compare these players statistically is that Bryant, Carter, and Wade were all, they weren't the same year, but they were in a similar time. All of them shot 30.5% or worse from three in the year that we're talking about, and all of them took 2.6 threes per 36 or fewer. Now, you included James Harden in this, and Harden, closer to the modern era, is much closer to Edwards in terms of attempt rate and percentage. But it's such a stark difference that reflects a lot of things in the league, and it's impressive that Edwards is his free throw attempt rate is actually pretty comparable to those guys. It's when you scale it for possessions, as you should, because the pace is so different now, it gets a little he's in the middle of the pack, not at the front of the pack. But that is pretty striking.
Well, and that to me is the skill that stands out even among these shooting guards, even with someone like James Harden, who wouldn't really develop that crazy step back ISO game until a couple years into his Houston tenure, that Anthony Edwards basically, shoots 36% from three, but after his rookie year, he was age 19, he's been 36% or over. And these are just really difficult off the dribble shots. And that's something from three that none of these other guys really had. I mean, Vince would be the guy maybe, but still even a little bit later into his career, who might have had that a little bit. But, and obviously Kobe would have moments where he could get hot, but Kobe, Anthony Edwards is shooting 38% on threes this year on this incredibly difficult shot diet. He can come off screens off the ball. Obviously, he can create them in isolation. He can shoot them out of the pick and roll. So that's the biggest thing that he has that these guys don't. Now, I think those guys just had more moves inside the arc. I do think particularly Dwyane Wade was a better passer, despite the fact Edwards is averaging a little bit more in terms of assists. It is just, that was an era in which it was much harder to be that heliocentric guy. And I think actually Dwyane Wade might have really been one of the first of those who wasn't at the point guard position, who was really dominating the ball. I mean, if you look at the synergy stats for Wade in 04-05, so that's his age 23 season, but he's taking basically no spot up attempts whatsoever that year. He's just on the ball all the time. And of course, you remember the year after that, the 06 finals, you had one of the most dominating finals runs that we've ever seen. Frankly, a better finals run than Kobe ever had in that 06 finals. So that's a little bit different. He was really kind of the first of those. There was a time when Jordan would have the ball up top. In 1989, they moved him to point guard, and he had to run a triple doubles. But generally, guys at that size, if they weren't just a pure point guard like Magic, who was really an anomaly and still is, at his size. He was really one of the first guys to be that heliocentric guy with size who wasn't, just a pure John Stockton style of point guard. Yeah, what else sticks out to you as you compare these players? I guess we should talk about just their efficiency, which is, I think, probably where Edwards lags behind the most at this point relative to league average.
Relative to league average, he does. And so if you're comparing, like, I brought up free throw attempts per 100 possessions, and so Kobe was the leader there, 10.5 free throw attempts per 100 possessions, and he's also the best free throw shooter at this age of this group. I believe he was overall in his career too. And so that's, of course, a huge way that he made his advantage. Also, like, part of the reason why, relative to league average, most of these guys were so much more efficient is, like, I mean, Edwards over 50% on twos and taking volume, but, like, when you think about the eras and everything else like that, so Anthony Edwards took 18 twos per 100 possessions. Kobe Bryant took 25. Like, it's incredible just how the nature of shots has changed. And also Edwards, like, all these guys have complicated roles in terms of their team's offense. But Edwards, if we're shifting on era and doing 100 possessions, he has the highest turnover rate per 100 possessions of any of these guys but Wade. But as you mentioned, Wade was a better passer. He filled a different role than I think Edwards does, at least mostly.
Yeah, so I think as you look at this, Harden is a little bit different because he wasn't starting. Harden also had 66% true shooting back in an era in which the league average was around 53% in that 11-12 season. I mean, that was just absolutely insane numbers. 21 usage. Again, he goes to Houston the next year and he moves immediately into that more heliocentric role. That's the year before Dwight Howard arrives there, but he does lead that team to the playoffs, ironically enough, against the Thunder. And Edwards, right at league average in true shooting. Kobe, he's got 55% true shooting in his age 22 season. League average, again, is a little under 52%. Wade, what was he in his age 22 season?
53%.
Yeah, so that's again, that's his rookie year. I mean, I do think there is something to the idea that it's your rookie year, even if you are the same age, you still have to, like, Anthony Edwards has been basically the go-to guy for 2.5 seasons, really almost 3.5 seasons now for the Wolves. It really was when Chris Finch came in his rookie year that he started to get the ball more and started to break out. So I am fascinated to see where it goes from here. But I don't think that I would have Edwards quite on the same level of Harden. I mean, comparing him to Harden at this age is a little bit different. I mean, what about Harden's next season, that 23 season? That might be more comparable to kind of what Edwards is doing now, that first season in Houston.
So if we're comparing that year, kind of, I'll do some of the basic stats. So Harden's age 23 year, the first year in Houston, 60% true shooting on 29 usage. So Edwards is at 32. But then if you add in, usage and assists. So at that point, Harden was averaging 5.5 assists per 36, which is almost exactly what Edwards is averaging now. So the role was there, but Harden was a more efficient overall player, in part because that was when his free throw attempts skyrocketed, in part because he was starting and the ball was in his hands more.
Yeah, so I think ultimately Edwards, to me, falls in right below those guys as maybe the fourth best shooting guard prospect at this age and maybe I think if you look at his stature right now compared to where Harden was after that third year in OKC as well, where he just wasn't starting. I think if you asked me in 2012, who's a better prospect, James Harden, or I could go forward in time for Anthony Edwards, I'd probably have to say Anthony Edwards. I think Harden got that max contract in Houston. People maybe raised an eyebrow at it a little bit, but he actually had a non-guarantee on his fifth year. I think there was still a feeling that he'd been great in Oklahoma City, but you just didn't know what was going to happen.
Oh, can I throw one? Can I throw one other player out there?
Yeah.
So more comparable in terms of era, less comparable in terms of style of play. Devin Booker's age 22 season. Remember, this is when the Suns were still kind of in the process of figuring it out. You and I were worried about it, but 58% true shooting on 33 usage. So the usage rate is very similar to Edwards. Of course, he's playing in a comparable era. They didn't do it in the same way, and I believe that was one of the years, this was Booker's fourth year, where he had the ball in his hands all the time. We're like, he's good at that, but he's not great at that. But it is, again, I don't think of them as physically like the same type of player, but it is. He's another guy who of course has blossomed into being a wonderful shooting guard in his own right. But I think he's not the physically dominant player, so like it's a different archetype. But had a similar role within his offense if we're just talking about those counting stats. You're welcome, Suns fans.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, yeah. So that would have been what year was Devin?
18-19.
Year? That was 18-19. Yeah, I mean that was really the first year where he started really driving his team's offense to be more effective. But yeah, I guess I didn't focus on him as much because we haven't seen how his career has played out, and also he's not that like super athletic.
Right. I just wanted to mention it just because in my brain I'm like, I think that was the Booker year where he had the larger role within the offense, and so there are some looser parallels there.